April 1942, just 4 months after Pearl Harbor, America was wounded, furious, and desperate for hope. Across the Pacific, the Japanese Empire seemed unstoppable. Rolling across Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, victory after victory, American newspapers whispered a dark question: can Japan be stopped? No American bomb had ever fallen on Tokyo. No one had dared attempt it. The distance, impossible. The risks, unimaginable. But one man, a quiet, brilliant, stubborn U.S. Army aviator, believed the impossible could be done. His name was Lieutenant Colonel James Harold Doolittle, and his plan would change the course of the war. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. When the Japanese attack struck Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,400 Americans, President Franklin D. Roosevelt demanded an answer. The nation needed a victory, or at least a strike, something to show Japan that the United States was not defeated. General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, understood the president's need. He turned to one man who had never failed him, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. Aviator, MIT engineer, racing pilot, test pilot, and one of the most daring airmen to ever wear American wings. Washington, D.C., January 1942. Doolittle walked into Arnold's office carrying blueprints and maps. He proposed something insane: launch medium bombers from an aircraft carrier, fly 650 miles over open ocean, strike Tokyo, keep flying to China with almost no fuel, a mission with no return, no landing back on the carrier, no rescue guaranteed, no second chances. Arnold studied the plan. If we fail, he warned, the president's credibility will be destroyed. Doolittle nodded. If we succeed, it will shock the empire. Roosevelt approved. Operation Codename, Special Aviation Project Number 1. The men would simply call it the Tokyo Raid. The U.S. Navy had never launched a twin-engine bomber from a carrier. No one had, but Doolittle insisted on the B-25 Mitchell, built by North American Aviation. Why? Short takeoff distance, reliable engines, good bomb load, strong enough for low-level flight, long range, barely enough, and only with modifications. Aircraft had to be gutted and rebuilt, extra fuel tanks added, lower defensive guns removed, Norden bomb sights replaced with a simple $2 piece of metal to avoid capture, a fake tail gun, made from broomsticks, installed to deter Japanese fighter attacks. The B-25s became lean, stripped-down machines of survival. When Doolittle asked for volunteers, he gave almost no details. We're going on a dangerous mission. Those who do not wish to go may drop out. No questions asked. Not a single man stepped back. 80 volunteers forming 16 bomber crews came from 17th Bomb Group, 34th Squadron, 37th Squadron, 95th Squadron. Key names included Captain Ted Lawson, later wrote 30 Seconds Over Tokyo; Lieutenant Dick Cole, Doolittle's co-pilot and last surviving raider; Captain David M. Jones, pilot of Crew 5, later general, imprisoned in Stalag Luft 3; Lieutenant Travis Hoover, pilot of Plane 2; Sergeant Jacob DeShazer, later became famous for forgiving his captors; Lieutenant Robert Gray, pilot of Plane 13, killed in China; Lieutenant William Farrow, pilot of Plane 16; Sergeant Harold Spatz, gunner, executed by the Japanese. Most of the men were barely in their early 20s. Doolittle told no one that he expected to die on this mission and believed he would be court-martialed if it failed. Florida, February-March 1942. At Eglin Field, the pilots trained to take off in just 500 feet, the length of a carrier deck, practicing with chalk lines painted on the runway, engines roaring, wheels lifting with only 3 seconds of roll. They also trained for low-level flying over the ocean, wave-skimming navigation, dead reckoning at night, high-speed rooftop-level attack runs. The secrecy was absolute. Letters were censored, movements were hidden. These men were being groomed for a one-way mission they still didn't fully understand. March 31st, 1942, Alameda Naval Air Station. The 16 B-25s were hoisted onto the deck of the new aircraft carrier USS Hornet CV-8. On April 2nd, the Hornet put to sea. The deck revealed a shocking sight to the Navy crew. Army bombers where fighter planes should be. Captain Mark Mitcher, commanding the Hornet, welcomed Doolittle and his men. The Navy and the Army had never shared a mission like this before. Escorts included USS Enterprise CV-6 under Admiral William Bull Halsey, 2 cruisers, 8 destroyers, 2 oilers. This was one of the most powerful fleets ever assembled. Codename Task Force 16. April 18, 1942. Before dawn, 650 miles from Japan. The plan was to launch at 450 miles from Japan, but fate intervened. Japanese picket boats, small patrol ships, spotted the American fleet. One of them, Nido Maru, commanded by First Lieutenant Yoshio Takasu. Though the ship was sunk by American destroyers, it transmitted a warning, "Enemy task force heading toward Japan." The mission was compromised. Admiral Halsey made the call. He signaled Doolittle, "Launch bombers, carry out mission." They were now 200 miles farther from Japan than planned. The bombers would almost certainly run out of fuel. Doolittle looked at his men. "We go," he said. USS Hornet, 0820 a.m. Halsey turned the ship into the wind. 30-foot waves smashed over the deck. Spray soaked the aircraft. The ship pitched violently. One by one, the 16 B-25s prepared for the riskiest takeoff in American aviation history. Doolittle's plane, crew number 1, B-25B number 40-2344, rolled to the edge. The deck was only 467 feet long. Doolittle pushed the throttles forward. The plane dipped, sagged toward the waves, then lifted. The mission had begun. One after another, the remaining 15 bombers lifted off successfully. Not a single plane was lost. It was nothing short of miraculous. The bombers flew at low altitude, often just 200 feet above the water, to avoid radar. Inside the cockpit's navigation charts, fuel calculations, stress, exhaustion. Each crew knew that. They would not land back on the carrier. They would not have enough fuel. They would probably crash in China at night. But they pressed on. As they approached Japan, they climbed to 1,200 feet. Targets included military factories, oil storage, shipyards, the Yokosuka Naval Base, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. Japan's air defenses were caught by surprise. 12:25 p.m. over Tokyo. Doolittle's plane was the first to attack. He released 4 500-pound bombs over the industrial district along the Sumida River. Other raiders hit the Mitsubishi aircraft plant, Kawasaki shipyards, oil tanks, steel works, power stations, military facilities. Civilians were not the target, though some were inevitably affected. Anti-aircraft guns erupted across Tokyo and the nearby cities. Japanese fighters scrambled, but too late. In less than 30 minutes, all 16 bombers had dropped their loads. The psychological effect was massive. Japan, thought to be untouchable, had been struck. After the attack, the raiders turned south toward China. Fuel gauges dropped steadily. A massive storm awaited them. Heavy rain, fog, brutal winds. Most aircraft had been in the air for 13 hours, the longest B-25 missions ever flown. One by one, the planes ran out of fuel. 15 crews bailed out or crash-landed in China. One plane, crew number 8 led by Captain York, diverted to the Soviet Union and was interned. Miraculously, 69 of the 80 raiders survived the landings. Chinese villagers and resistance fighters risked their lives to rescue them. Not all were lucky. 8 men from 2 crews were captured. Captain William Farrow, Lieutenant Dean Hallmark, Sergeant Harold Spatz, Lieutenant Robert Meter, Sergeant Chong, Corporal Nielsen, Corporal Haidt, Corporal Barr. They were tortured in Shanghai. A Japanese military court sentenced 3 to death, Lieutenant Hallmark, Captain Farrow, Sergeant Spatz. They were executed by firing squad in October 1942. Lieutenant Robert Meter died in captivity in 1943. The remaining 4 survived until war's end. Doolittle crash-landed in China. He thought the mission had failed. "I assumed I'd be court-martialed," he later said. Instead, he was summoned to Washington. President Roosevelt awarded him the Medal of Honor. The entire nation celebrated the raiders as heroes. The mission was a massive psychological victory. Japan reacted harshly. Believing Chinese civilians helped the Americans, Japan launched the Zhejiangjiangxi campaign, massacring over 250,000 Chinese civilians. More importantly, and fatefully, the Doolittle raid convinced Japanese leadership that the American carriers were a dire threat. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto made a decision: destroy the U.S. carriers at Midway. This led directly to the Battle of Midway, where Japan lost 4 carriers. The Doolittle raid became the spark that turned the tide of the Pacific War. After the raid, the 80 men continued serving. Doolittle rose to general, commanding the 8th Air Force over Europe. Dick Cole, last survivor, lived to 103. Jacob DeShazer, former POW, returned to Japan after the war as a missionary. David Jones, POW survivor, became a major general. Ted Lawson, severely injured, became an author. Many others fought in North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific. Every year, the raiders held a secret ceremony. They gathered around a case of 80 silver goblets, one for each raider. When a raider died, his goblet was turned upside down. The last ceremony was held in 2019. Only one goblet remains upright, that of Richard E. Dick Cole. In the darkest moment of World War II, 80 volunteers climbed into 16 bombers. Knowing they might never return, they launched into a storm, flew across the Pacific, and struck the heart of an empire. Their bombs caused limited physical damage, but immeasurable psychological impact. They showed the world that Americans would not surrender. They forced Japan into rash decisions. They lifted a nation's spirit. They helped turn the tide of a global war. They were not just airmen. They were symbols. Symbols of courage. Symbols of resilience. Symbols of hope. They were the Doolittle Raiders, and their legend will never fade.